Right. Jasdev Singh as Director Sikh Human Rights Group. We have been proposing a United Nations Declaration on Diversity. And why are we proposing this? This is what I'm going to try and explain. We can see that diversity in human beings, in other species, in biodiversity, and in nature. Currently, diversity within human beings, within states, usually concerns a minority of one sort or other. So if it's within a state, almost every the acknowledgement or acceptance of diversity is regarding a minority. For instance, it may be an ethnic minority, a lifestyle minority, a religious minority. Whereas globally, diversity obviously constitutes a mosaic of regional, continental and national differences. Let's look at some of the categories of diversity. There is racial, ethnic, religious, gender, lifestyle, age, medical, for instance, mental illness, disability, Tourette's syndrome, height, and then there are acquired medical the groups which become minorities, such as those with cerebral palsy, loss of limbs, sight, hearing, etc. They become minorities as a diverse minority within the larger population. There are linguistic minorities, cultural beliefs and other interests. And in species there are, of course, mammals, reptiles, insects, and many insects are depleting now. There's arachnoids, bacteria, viruses and other forms of species. In biodiversity there are plants, algae, and also natural diversity of species. And of course in nature there is flat earth, mountains, terrains, rivers, lakes, oceans, air, atmosphere, elements. All these are different, the diversity that is quite naturally existing around us. And as I said before, most human diversity constitutes a minority within a state. And that's where diversity gets most hammered or marginalized or deprived of acceptance and equality. Most the recourse to accepting diversity is a rights-based approach. So minority groups, whether it's let us say people with autism or people of an ethnic origin, people of or even gender, they have to go to courts or have to lobby governments that the government and the state must also give them resources or make equal opportunities for them and accept them and reduce discrimination within society against them. So there is a huge amount of current legal and other instruments. It's no wonder lawyers are multiplying, perhaps the most multiplying profession. There is Declaration on Rights of Persons belonging to national, ethnic, religious, linguistic minority. There is Indigenous and Tribal Populations Convention, Convention Against Discrimination in Education, Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, and you can go on, you can find list of conventions and declarations on what are essentially trying to give diverse groups the same some access, status, etc. In the current report of the Special Rapporteur on Minorities, it's interesting. Now we are in 2020. The United Nations started in 1948. So in nearly 2 years or 71 years after, there is no agreed definition of a minority. The absence of consistency in understanding who is a minority is a recurring stumbling block to the full and effective realization of the rights of minorities. So diversity within a state is a minority usually, and that minority is not given rights because there is no understanding of who constitutes a minority. So what you find is different UN entities may contradict one another because they consider different groups of persons as constituting a minority and diverge from practices in other entities. And some state members of the United Nations hesitate to engage on matters relating to minorities since they do not know who is a minority and what that entails. So states themselves tend to shy away from the whole field of diversity expressed through a minority group because they don't know how to define it, who exactly forms a minority. It was famously said by India one time that every group in India is a minority since there is no corporate Hinduism. There are so many disparate people believe in different gods, therefore every little group is a minority because there's no one dominating overall. Which was a clever way of the state denying rights to groups like Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, etc. But you know how states can also employ this lack of definition. In other states there may even be an assumption that the absence of a definition means it is left to each state to determine freely who is or is not a minority. So, so different countries will say to you, well, you're not really a minority, you're part of a significant group within the country and therefore you don't constitute a minority. Within Indians there are Sikhs, there are Buddhists, there are Muslims, Indians, etc. In UK, the UK could say, well, you're all Indians and we can only deal with you as one group. You're not a minority. Within a minority, you're not a distinct minority. So in most of these situations, the uncertainty leads to restrictive approaches. In many situations, persons are deemed to be undeserving because they are not traditionally minorities. They are not traditional minorities. Not citizens are not sufficiently dominated. So we can see how diversity becomes abused or intentionally or unintentionally diversity is not nurtured because that diverse group is forced to become part of another minority or the state simply does not recognize as a group. The end result is that some minorities are excluded because they are not the right kind of minority according to different parties. So they are not the right kind of diversity in a way. So what we suggested was a declaration on diversity which takes a positive approach to diversity, a complementary approach to the current whole list of array of laws, conventions, declarations. And so the state is proactive rather than a minority having to try and get its rights through courts or lobbying or going on demonstrations and things like that. It is consistent, part of the Durban Declaration, paragraph 6, which say we further affirm that all peoples and individuals constitute one human family, rich in diversity. They have contributed to the progress of civilizations and cultures that form the common heritage of humanity. Preservation and promotion of tolerance, pluralism and respect for diversity can produce more inclusive societies. So there is already within one of the previous UN declarations, the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, as I said, they are not talking about necessarily a rights approach. They are saying how to preserve this and how to promote it, the pluralism and respect for diversity. So, and a declaration of diversity will promote inclusive societies because the state will itself start looking for diversity. It will not be defending, it will not be resistant to accepting diversity. It will not be saying, oh no, you are not, you don't constitute a distinct diversity or a minority group, but if the state has a slightly more proactive approach, then it may be more amenable to accepting the different diversity and have policies which will not only make diversity inclusive but also protecting it. So inclusive societies are happier, more productive and at peace, as people have noted about, for instance, Southall. There need to be positive programs of action by states of reduce marginalization to strengthen minority communities, to change attitudes and enhance cohesion between groups and sections of communities. We also have to look at biodiversity. Diversity is not just human beings, it also includes biodiversity in nature and other forms of life. There's now general acknowledgement that biodiversity is not only the essence of nature but necessary in maintaining ecosystems. We are all codependent in a way, not just working on the life of oneness, but if one species or one, let us say, form of biodiversity goes away, then it does in fact have an effect on others. The most current threat and example is the loss of bees. Not looking after bees, not ensuring that their natural habitat is preserved. Bees are dying, hence pollination is not taking place, hence it's affecting our food supply and affecting us all. Okay. So you can see how we are codependent. We may not like a bee because it stings us, but unfortunately we are dependent on them because they are so crucial in pollinating plants and therefore keeping agriculture going. So there's a sort of a rush now to try and see how we can reverse the decline in bees. And it is so with other systems as well. There's some insects when they die in mass, then you find other insects, insects come which destroy plants, and that affects us because within the ecosystem some insects eat other insects, some animals eat other animals and that sort of thing. So the whole of nature has built a very, very closely balanced ecosystem, and when we human beings interfere in it, we create problems for ourselves, not just other life forms. So we believe that besides, there needs to be a bit of a cultural change. So it's not just a rights-based or legal instrument, there needs to be a shift in the culture of people towards diversity in all its forms to reduce discrimination, marginalization and racism. So a Declaration of Diversity will enhance and complement the Durban Declaration by making a commitment to introduce policies and programs on greater awareness and acceptance of diversity. So if the state were to proactively promote diversity, people will begin to see and accept diversity. But if the state itself is resistant to that, then people also become xenophobic. States will be in fact be strengthening the ambitions of the Durban Declaration as well as many other conventions fighting discrimination. We also propose a Diversity Day in the world, UN-led Diversity Day. So on that day they will countries and cultures around the world will celebrate diversity. In other countries they might want to celebrate biodiversity, and it will be a great thing. It will inspire a mind shift in people. Because one of the things that happens when a minority group goes to court, not only do they have to have the hassle of fighting, getting resources, money and things they're fighting for to be treated equally, they find that the majority community starts despising them a little bit. Why are these people trying to get equal rights? And that tension will also go away if the state is more proactive. And it has worked in some countries, like for instance United Kingdom, where the state has taken some proactive steps. For instance, government jobs, they have to show there is a diversity of ethnicities represented, and it's in the private sector, for instance, the board boardrooms now in multinationals. They're asking why are there a few women, why are there not more women, why are there not more ethnicities, that sort of thing. It's a proactive approach by the state which makes people respect each other and accept each other. The declaration will foster better coexistence between people of all backgrounds, lifestyles and beliefs, and promote beliefs to be more respectful towards people of alternative beliefs. We see this in also increasingly a change in, for instance, the Christian Church in this country, and even the Roman Catholic Church. Only a few decades ago, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican was not all that enthusiastic about interfaith, and there was a decree by the Pope in 2001, I think, on interfaith, which was not very, which didn't really make many other communities very happy, because he said, we engage in interfaith, but obviously the Christian faith, the Catholic faith is the best. Now that doesn't, if you're already starting looking down on somebody else, it doesn't really engage in a mutual respectful discussion. But that has changed a lot now in the last 5 years in the Vatican as well, attitude towards other faiths. It has changed in the Church of England, their attitudes towards other faiths, and you see, so that percolates in other communities as well. So even belief systems adopt, there's a lot of change in many of the Islamic communities in this country about other faiths. It's the words such as kafir and all that sort of thing have gone way out from the vocabulary, everyday vocabulary. So by a declaration of diversity, the state, because that is the primary source of power in our daily relations, we believe the immense diversity among human beings and nature needs to be protected and nurtured through a combination of approaches, not just legal approaches, but through proactive programs. So diversity also includes biodiversity in nature and other forms of life. This is now generic. So how extensive can it be? A declaration of diversity can be wide enough to encourage acceptance and coexistence of civilizations, cultures, ethnicities, belief systems, lifestyle and ecosystems. And I think it will be a sort of a better world. Would this be compulsory on states? Well, a declaration of not necessarily binding. States can sign up for a declaration. They can develop their own approaches. Different states may have different approaches, and they can also benefit from best practices, learning from best practices from experience of other states. So, the United States has a certain way of being inclusive of diversity. The Canadians have a slightly different approach, and British have a different approach. India has a different approach. So, if they can showcase this at, let's say, at the UN on a yearly basis, it will, states may say, right, this is where we are lacking, and maybe we can learn from that. And they can also feel comfortable, because a refusal to accept diversity is usually the state or the majority feeling paranoid that they might be overwhelmed. The current status is that how we go about it, the current way a country has to propose this declaration at the UN. It will start a debate, it will need a resolution, then it will need the General Assembly to call for a World Conference, and the World Conference will pass it. It becomes part of the UN agenda, and a Diversity Day might be celebrated around the world. So it's the end of my talk, but the beginning of something else. We hope that we can persuade, and you can all join us in trying to persuade different countries to take up this idea forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think you have given a good overview of the purpose of the Diversity Declaration. I'd like to open for questions. And also I've got the slide on the current status. So when did you propose it first, and which
Well,
states?
we first actually proposed it in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism, and our experience was quite interesting. We said, we were saying, look, we need to, racism and agendas on racism locks us into a colonial era. And it's now nearly 70 years, 60, 70 years after that. We need to move on now. We can't keep on in that, locked in that tension of asking the white men to treat us as equally. And I said, well, we, the Sikhs, are not really bothered whether they treat us equally. And my statement was, racism is a pathology of the white man. It's nothing to do with the rest of the world. But we need to move on. The black Americans and the black British were resistant to it. They said a proactive approach to diversity, a declaration of diversity, may sideline the many actions we still need states to do. There's a lot of history yet, and we have still a lot of anger, and we're not sure whether we are ready for it. The African countries accepted it. They thought it was a good idea. The Europeans didn't want it, and I could understand why. If I give you the power to discriminate or not discriminate against me, why would you want to throw it away? Right? And that's what we Sikhs have always said. We won't give the dignity of power to you, because we don't accept it anyway. And this was the beginning of our struggle for turban. This is one of the reasons why we wear a turban. It is the most potent symbol of diversity. It started a huge battle in this country where we were being told, oh, you need to take off your turbans, you need to conform. And we said, no, we are not going to conform. If you're going to discriminate, so what? We'll set up shops, we'll set up our own school, we'll set up everything else. And eventually the British legal system had to change, and they had to accept. Whereas a lot of other people keep on going on. So European countries were not keen on this, you see, on this. Asian countries, they have never really, I don't know, they're strange actually, my experience of them. Of all the countries who took up this was Russia, which is not known for its anti-racism history. They took it up and they introduced a paragraph on education. Diversity should be part of education. Okay? And that was introduced in 2001. But we didn't have a consultative status at the UN, so we could not propose it further. We tried to get it, and then 2 years later, United Kingdom built on diversity as a major thing in the Olympics, its bid for Olympics, and diversity became a big thing. And I was saying to some government officials, we proposed to the UN, you didn't want it then, but now you want it because you want the Olympics here. A lot of things have changed here. We started since 2015, we got our status. 2016 we started talking to countries, but now it's becoming, we have talked to more and more countries. We've more or less raised it every year since 2017, 18, 19, 20. We've given written statements for the last 3 years. We were going to hold a side event this year. Unfortunately, Mr. Coronavirus came and defeated all of diversity. We hope we'll hold it more, and we are trying to lobby countries and see which country will take it up.
Thank you for the background. Yeah. Who has some comments or questions, suggestions?
You've included gender.
Sorry?
Gender.
What about gender diversity?
No, it's there. You said that. Gender diversity is very important, and we're saying currently, I think gender is the only thing which is, there is a slightly more proactive approach by countries. But still in many countries, gender is not a proactive approach. Women are still going to court to be treated equally. But we were saying, so if there is a declaration of diversity, states, you see the states, the UN system is quite interesting. They work by embarrassment. So if one state is saying, we have taken steps to do this, this and this and this, then other states want to compete and say, we've also taken steps to do this and this. And so by that, good examples, best practices, other states might start making diversity more inclusive.
Today's Women's Day, that's why I asked.
Is it what?
Today's Women's Day.
Yes.
Yeah.
surprise.
Yeah, it's
End
a
of
day, but
March.
it doesn't really help really.
So-
It hasn't really done much because there's still...
Well,
Oh yes, we have a woman here.
I am a woman, indeed I am. I mean, it's International Women's Day, so that's why I said like I did not see the word appearing gender in your how extensive.
No, I think there's, if you see in this fourth slide,
Okay.
of racial, ethnic, religious, gender,
Okay, good. We believe you.
So,
It's there, to check.
sorry?
It's there on the
It's
slide.
there. I just saw the extensive, how extensive it should be.
It's the fourth slide, yeah.
Good.
So that's why I said, okay, let me clarify.
on the gender, I think it's the Sikh perspective. I think sometimes we Sikhs tend to forget about the gender issue. I'll tell you why. Our Guru Nanak, we didn't get into the politics of equality or making them equal in that way. What he said, he made nonsense of the whole idea of male superiority. Yeah? This stanza in the Guru Granth Sahib, which says, of a woman are kings and leaders born. So how can you call a woman second class? So a king must be third class. So if you're born from second class, you must be third class. Okay? So how can male, without a woman, a male is nothing. And they made nonsense of it. So by the third Guru, 40% of the Sikh, what called priests, were women. We've had women generals, we've had women sort of taking up very leading positions. And where it started going downhill was a comment of the Harding brothers when they were negotiating with the Sikhs when the Sikh army got defeated. The person who was negotiating was a woman, Maharani Jinder, and in their diaries they say, what sort of a community is this? They've got a woman negotiating for them. And then discriminatory practices started under colonialism. But it's recovered a lot now. This STPC, which is the religious body of the Sikhs, managing the Gurdwaras, was formed in 1920, and before any Western country gave rights to women, before any Indian organization gave rights to women, the STPC had already included 35% seats for women. So you can see that proactively approach has been there, and it's the only religious organization in the world which has had a woman as its head. So we have not seen, because there's not been a practice of discrimination against women. We sometimes forget the gender dimension until it's reminded to us. But yeah, it's an important dimension outside us.
Yeah, I mean, 2 days ago, BBC put up this data on share of seats in Parliament held by women globally, and in Sub-Saharan Africa is the highest actually. 23.5% women actually in Sub-Saharan Africa are in leadership roles compared to Arab. Latin America is actually the highest, which is 31%, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, followed by Europe and Central Asia, East Asia and Pacific, and Arab states is South Asia is the lowest with 17% women. It's quite so that counts the point of diversity to pick on. And just the data came 2 days ago, and it's International Women's Day, so I think that's one of the reasons they might have put the data out globally in terms of leadership roles of women. So quite interesting. Latin America and the Caribbean is the highest, They have the maximum women, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe and Central Asia, East Asia and Pacific. Arab states are even more compared to South Asia. So Arab states are 18.3% women have seat in parliament compared to South Asia, which is only 17.1%. So as South Asians, we need to do a bit more.
But I think that's also interesting, because what we can do with the Declaration on Diversity is, if some countries already have exercised their diversity, it's not something strange to them. And it may be one of our approaches to go to the country and applaud them on their diversity, in whatever it may be, on gender diversity or
any other
religious tolerance, or all these diversities that you've mentioned here on the slide. And then they already say, well, this is nothing strange, and actually we would look very good if we do this.
Yeah.
And another approach it could be, okay, let's have the day on diversity. But in fact, we can also say to them, well, look, the comprehensive Declaration on Diversity will include all the existing days, like International Women's Day, International Children's Day, International Religious Tolerance Day, and so on, if there is. And say, we will have these days on this day, and this day, and we're also going to have one overall day of diversity. So that could be a way, another approach to that.
Could make it a public holiday internationally.
And everyone would really like to have another public holiday. Would you like another public holiday?
Or
always up for holidays.
it would be an opportunity for another conference, wouldn't it? On a public holiday.
Yeah.
How do we get on board, so often a lot of secular countries now are having more influence from the church, or in Arab countries will be so the imams or the religious leaders. I'm assuming that we need to try and get on board kind of religions and different organizations that influence thinking. So for example, in America, kind of the churches have got a lot more influence than it did, say, 50 years ago. Even in Europe, the church, the Pope, they have a lot of influence, and a lot of diversity is often stopped because of what people think about what their religion is telling them. So, I mean, do we need to get religious leaders involved, because they obviously have a big influence on how people think? So whether it's diversity or acceptance of people's gender, sexual orientation, women's role in society. So, I mean, I don't know if that's really been touched on.
Interesting, yeah. Jasdev, would you like to reply on that?
Difficult one, yeah. Even in different countries.
Yeah, I mean, this is very important and powerful, but I feel that we need to get on board religious leaders, so the Catholics, the Pope, whoever's kind of running the Arab world. As increasingly secular states are now being influenced more and more, especially in the West, by religion. So like you can see in America, you can see in Eastern Europe. So I just thought that they're becoming more influential, so we need to try and target the way they're thinking to try and disseminate information.
Yeah, you're right actually. I think one thing would be to bring all the powerful influencers on. It's not just religious leaders who they influence behavior on lifestyles, on women, things like that. And there's been a lot of change within the, let's say, the Protestant Christian Church. There is increasingly some change in the Muslim world. Sometimes I think there's also an attempt to try and evaluate other traditions through one's own tradition. We went to Iran, a biodiversity conference there. At least 3 of the vice chancellors of university were women. 60% of the medical intake at the university, we were Ali Khomeini University, were women. There were many taxi drivers who were women. There were many bus drivers who were women. And yet, when you read the papers here, you get the impression that in Iran, women are sitting at home in burqas. Yeah? The only thing is the Ayatollah is not a woman. And that you can't just hold that against Iran. So their concepts of gender parity is slightly different, but it's there. Opportunities are there. Women are quite powerful there. There are some ministers who are women. Yeah, you're right. We need to try and get religious leaders together as well, on the international level, and see what they, how they can make gender more inclusive, or they can all become Sikhs. Well, I think in the West it's the secular philosophy which has forced religions to become more pro-gender. Although there's still resistance in some institutions, whereas in India there are some schools of thought within the Hindu framework who are quite male-dominating. It will be difficult to try and, because there's so many dispersed groups, but there was a temple case, a Sabramali temple case in the Supreme Court, which was quite interesting, where they banned women from entering the temple on certain days in the year. I think there's 2 months or so when only celibate men can go in there. There was a case at the Supreme Court, and that case was won by women. But the argument against, I think religious leaders find it difficult sometimes because they've had thousands of years of interpretation which has been anti-women. How do they suddenly change that interpretation? So they are being forced by the secular climate, whereas other traditions like Sikhs and Buddhists, I think Buddhists to a great extent as well, who do not have a gender bias, they're more amenable.
Sukran, you have a question or comment, please, Sukran?
Yes, thank you. Hi everybody again. Thank you for presentation, the Jadish Shinghrai. I think I read correctly. I hope. My question is, actually I did a comment, and after I will ask my question. The priority of discrimination should start from gender and age, because this discrimination is related to the smallest building block of the society in the family. In this, if discrimination is minimized, it decreases in those of cultural, religious, and ethnic or language origin, because the child will have the opportunity to learn about equal rights, equal freedom, and fairness at the home. This will be an important step, I think. What do you think about this? We usually ordered some discriminative topics, but we should maybe start with the priority after. First of all, we should handle gender and age, according to me. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So, gender and age are the most important aspects of diversity because
Yeah.
they relate most closely to the family as the critical unit of society. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is why we are proposing a declaration on diversity. If the state is more proactive in ensuring that both gender and age are made more acceptable, because in a very commercialized world, people after a certain age become redundant to the commercial activity of the country. So they're not respected, they're dispatched into little old age homes, whereas traditionally they were respected within the family. There were social value attached to them. I think if the state were proactively engaged in trying to make age acceptable, the state will then try and create programs which the benefit of older people to families and to society would be understood. And similarly with gender, you can't sort of disenfranchise half of the state's community. And countries which have had gender parity have done very well. In fact, are more successful, are happier, the families are happier. Where there's still discrimination, those countries are not, in my opinion, very happy. So that's, this is why a declaration will work by good practices as well, and it will persuade others to be proactive in this.
Okay, Sukran?
Yeah, thank you. He is agree with me, I think.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, agree. Because the family is very important. We learn actually main values in our family. If there is no discrimination in the family, woman and mother and wife and husband, or the grandpa, grandma and others, this is very important. That time we already learn the fairness, the equal rights, etc. That time we can easily practice the other topics also. Yeah, thank you. I agree. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Yes, I have a doubt. My question is on including biodiversity in the Declaration on Diversity. There is a rising diversity that can surge coming from the Anthropocene. In some cities, if I don't remember Durban, new insects has been found whose main driver has been the human action. Should we include in the Declaration of Diversity this new kind of diversity? How are the ethical implications of this? Thank you.
You're saying the insects have been engineered or?
No, mutated from natural insects due to the human action.
Yeah.
Not engineered, but driven by the excess of pollution and other unethical action against the nature.
Yeah. I think one of the great things about nature is that life forms adapt and mutate according to environments. Yeah. If they have done that, then we have to include them in the whole array of diversity. And a declaration of diversity doesn't mean, for instance, we don't get rid of certain things, but we shouldn't get rid of them en masse. So if you have a lot of mice in your house, it doesn't mean you start respecting the mice in your house. You have to get rid of the mice because they bring disease and things like that. But should you eliminate the whole population of mice in the town? No, you should not do that, because they have their own value. Similarly, if there are insects which are mutated in response to environment, in response to other things, and there are life forms who are mutating in response to nuclear fallout as well, and they seem to be able to survive in the climate where most of us would die. Well, that's how the nature keeps life forms surviving, and we need to respect it. As long as they're not threatening us, they're not directly critical of a disease.
Yes, but these insect species actually, if we should include in the Declaration of Biodiversity, are actually an endangered species. So if we correct the unsustainable path in many cities, this species will disappear.
Right. So we have to find ways of preserving them. We have to. I mean, it's a constant battle with animals, mammals as well. There are many mammals. There are quite a few species which have disappeared because of human action, having deforestation. Animals have nowhere to go, and that I think that sort of policy has to be reversed. Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else would like to ask a question? Suma, you had some comments?
Yes, because that idea of diversity in the declaration sounds really good, but could we define it? I mean, that would make things clearer. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did you define diversity?
How do we define diversity? It's anything which is not what is it? Diversity, I suppose, means that not something which is not necessarily conforming to one structure, one life form, one lifestyle, one culture. So we see diversity all around us. Instead of trying to make everything, let's say cultural diversity, if we try to make all cultures into one culture, that is anti-diversity, that's destroying diversity. If we force, let's say at one time, people who were left-handed were severely reprimanded or even punished or even jailed in some European countries, but left-handed people, if they're forced to become right-handed people, then they do not develop that much. So, that's a very diversity there facing us. If left-handed people are allowed to be left-handed people, let them be left-handed people. That's how we would describe diversity. It's I suppose opposition of uniformity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? I think it's been a very interesting expose of the Declaration of Diversity and the reasons why it's already partly established in principle, and it seems that the Declaration would unite it together, so it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Jasdev. Thank you.